Hi guys, welcome back to the Bluegrass Kids. Today I'm going to be reading A Bear Called Paddington part 1. So that's what we're going to do. Not part 1. Not part 1. We're going to be reading A Bear Called Paddington part 3. Part 3, guys. So this is part 3 of A Bear Called Paddington. So let's get started into the book. Well, until where we left off. Okay, so we left off on chapter 2. Ready, guys? 3, 2, 1. Chapter 2, A Bear in Hot Water. Paddington wasn't quite sure what to expect when Mrs. Bird opened the door. He was pleasantly surprised when they were greeted by a stout, mothery lady with gray hair and a kindly twinkle in her eyes. When she saw Judy, she raised her hand above her head. "Goodness gracious, you arrived already," she said in horror, and me hardly finished the washing up. "I suppose you'll be wanting tea." "Hello, Mrs. Bird," said Judy. "It's nice to see you again. How's the rhythm?" I cannot pronounce this word, but "Worse than it's ever been," began Mrs. Bird. Then she stopped speaking and stared at Paddington. "Whatever have you got there?" she asked. "What is it?" "It's not a what," said Judy. "It's a bear. His name is Paddington." Paddington raised his hat. "A bear?" said Mrs. Bird doubtfully. Well, he has good manners. I'll say that for him." "He's going to stay with us," announced Judy. "He immigrated from South America, and he's all alone with nowhere to go." "Going to stay with us?" Mrs. Bird raised her arms again. "How long for?" Judy looked around mysteriously before replying. "I don't know," she said. "It depends on things." "Mercy me!" exclaimed Mrs. Bird. "I wish you told me. I haven't put clean sheets in the spare room or anything." She looked down at Paddington. Though judging by the state he's in, perhaps that's as well. "It's all right, Mrs. Bird," said Paddington. "I think I'm going to have a bath. I had an accident with a bun." "Oh, Mrs. Bird Mrs. Bird held the door open. "Oh, well, in that case, you best come on in. Only mind the carpet. It's just been done." Judy looked hold of Paddington's paw and squeezed. "She doesn't mind really," she whispered. "I think she rather likes you." Paddington watched the retreating figure of Mrs. Bird. "She seems a bit fierce," he said. Mrs. Bird turned. "What was that you said?" Paddington jumped. He began. "Where was it you said where you come from, Prue?" "That's right," said Paddington. "Darkest Prue." "Hump!" Mrs. Bird looked thoughtful. For a moment, then "I expect you like marmalade. I'd better get some more from the grocer." "There you are. What did I tell you?" cried Judy as the door shut behind Mrs. Bird. "She does like you." "Fancy her knowing I like marmalade," said Paddington. "Mrs. Bird knows everything about everything," said Judy. "Now, you better come upstairs with me. I'll show you your room. It used to be mine when I was small. and it has lots of pictures of bears around the wall, so I expect you feel at home. She led the way up a long flight of stairs, chattering all the time. Paddington followed closely behind, keeping carefully to the side so that he didn't have to tread on the carpet. That's the bathroom, said Juddy, and that's my room. And that's Jonathan's. He's my brother. You'll meet him soon. And that's Mom and Dad's room. She opened a door, and this is going to be yours. Paddington nearly fell over with a surprise. When he followed her into the room, he'd never seen such a big one. There was a large bed with white sheets against the wall, and several big boxes, one with a mirror on it. Juddy pulled open a drawer in one of the boxes. This is called a chest of drawers, she said. You'll be able to keep all your things in here. Paddington looked at the drawer and then at his suitcase. I don't seem to have very much. That's the trouble with being small. No one ever expects you to want things. Then we shall see what we can do, said Juddy mysteriously. I'll try and get Mom and to take you on of her shopping expectations. She knelt down beside him. Let me help you unpack. It's very kind of you, Paddington fumbled with a lock, but I don't think there's much to help me with. There's a jar of marmalade, only there's hardly any left now, and what there is taste of seaweed in my scrapbook. And come Cavis, there are sort of South American penny. Gosh, said Juddy, I've never seen one of those before. Aren't they bright? Oh, I kept them polished, said Paddington. I don't spend them. He pulled out a tattered photograph, and that's a picture of my Aunt Lucy. She had it taken just before she went into the home for retired bears in Lima. She looks very nice, said Juddy, and very wise. Seeing that Paddington had a sad, fairy look in his eyes, she added hastily, well, I'm going to leave you now, so that way you can do your bath and come down nice and clean. You'll find two taps, one marked hot and one marked cold. They're plenty of soap, and clean towel. Oh, and a brush so you can scrub your back. It sounds very complicated, said Paddington. Can't I just sit in the puddle or something? Juddy laughed. Somehow I don't think Mrs. Bird will approve of that. And don't forget to wash your ears. They look awfully black. They're meant to be black, Paddington called indignantly as Juddy shut the door. He climbed up into a stool by the window and looked out. There was a large, interesting garden below, with a small pond and several trees, which looked good for climbing. Beyond the trees, he could see some more houses, stretching away into the distance. He decided it must be wonderful living in a house like this all the time. He stayed where he was, thinking about it, until the window became steamed up and he couldn't see out of it anymore. Then he tried writing his name on the cloudy part with his paws. He began to wish it wasn't quite so long, as he soon ran out of cloud and it was rather difficult to spell. All the same, he climbed into the dressing table and looked at himself in the mirror. It's a very important name, and I don't expect there are many bears in the world, called Paddington. If he only knew. Jody was saying exactly the same thing to Mr. Brown at the very moment the Browns were holding a council of war in the dining room, and Mr. Brown was fighting a losing battle. It had been Judy's idea in the first place to keep Paddington. In this, she not only had Jonathan on her side, but also her mother. Jonathan had yet to meet Paddington, but the idea of having a bear in the family appealed to him. It sounded very important. After all, Henry, argued Mrs. Brown, you can't turn him out now. It wouldn't be right. Mr. Brown sighed. He knew what he was beaten. It wasn't that he didn't like the idea of keeping Paddington. Secretly, he just as keen as anyone. But as head of the Browns household, he felt he ought to consider the matter from every angle. I'm sure we ought to report the matter to someone first, he said. I don't see why, Dad, cried Jonathan. Besides, he might get arrested for being a stowaway if we do that. Mrs. Brown put down her knitting. Jonathan's right, Henry. We can't let that happen. It's not if he's done anything wrong. I'm sure he didn't harm anyone traveling in a lifeboat like that. Then there's the question of a pocket money, said Mr. Brown, weakening. I'm not sure how much pocket money to give a bear. He can only pound a week. He can have a pound a week, the same as the other children, replied Mrs. Brown. Mr. Brown lit his pipe carefully before replying. Well, he said, we have to see what Mrs. Bird has to say about it first. Of course, there was a triumph course from the rest of the family. You better ask her then, said Mrs. Brown when the noise had died down. It was your idea. Mr. Brown coughed. He was a little bit afraid of Mrs. Bird, and he wasn't at all sure how he could take it. He was about to suggest they left it for a little while when the door opened and Mrs. Bird herself came in with the tea things. She paused for a moment and looked round at the sea of expectant faces. I suppose, she said, you want to tell me you've decided to keep that young Paddington, maybe, Miss Bird? Pleaded Judy. Please, I'm sure it will be very good. Humph, said Mrs. Bird, put the tray down on the table. That remains to be seen. Different people have different ideas about being good. All the same, he hesitated at the door. He looked the sort of bear that means well. Then you don't mind Mrs. Bird? Mr. Brown asked her. Mrs. Bird thought for a moment. No, I don't mind at all. I've always had a soft spot for bears myself. It's nice to have one about the house. Well, gasped Mrs. Brown as the door closed. Whoever would have thought it? I expect it would be because he raised his hat, said. I expect it was because he raised his hat, said Judy. It made a good impression, Mrs. Bird, like polite people. Mrs. Brown picked up her knitting again. I suppose someone ought to write and tell his Aunt Lucy. I'm sure she'd like to know he's safe. She turned to Judy. Perhaps it would be nice, thought you, Jonathan wrote. By the way, said Mr. Brown. "Come to think of it, where is Paddington? He's not still up in his room, is he?" Jody looked up from the writing desk. Where was she was searching for him. Notepaper? Oh, he's all right. He's just having a bath. A bath? Mrs. Brown's face took on a worried expression. He's rather small to be having a bath all by himself. Don't fuss so, Mary, grumbled Mr. Brown, settling himself down in the armchair next with a newspaper. He's probably having the time of his life. Mr. Brown was fairly near the truth when he said Paddington was probably having the time of his life. Unfortunately, it wasn't in quite the way it meant it. Blissfully unaware that his fate was being decided, Paddington was sitting in the middle of the bathroom floor drawing a map of South America with a tube of Mr. Brown's shaving cream. Paddington looked garfy. At least he looked like sort of garfy, which meant seeing strange places and new people. Before he left South America on his long journey to England, his Aunt Lucy, who was a very wise old bear, had done her best to teach him all she knew. She had told him all about the places he would see on the way, and she had spent many long hours reading to him about the people he would meet. It had been a long journey, halfway around the world, and so Paddington's map occupied most of the bathroom floor and also used most of Mr. Brown's shaving cream, with a little was left tied writing his new name again. He had several attempts to finally decide on Paddington. It looked most important. It wasn't until a trickle of warm water landed on his nose that realized the bath was full and was beginning to run over the side. With a sigh, he climbed up into the side of the bath, closed his eyes, held his nose with one paw, and jumped. The water was hot and soapy, and much deeper than he had expected. In fact, he had to stand on a tiptoe even to keep his nose above the surface. It was then that he had a nasty shock. It's one thing getting into a bath, it's quite another getting out, especially when the water comes up to your nose and the sides are slippery and your eyes are full of soap. He can't even see to turn the taps off. He cried, calling out, "Help!" first in quite a quiet voice, and then very loud, "Help! Help!" He waited for a few moments, but no one came. Suddenly he had an idea. What good thing he was still wearing his hat. He took it off and began bailing out of the water. There were several holes in the hat because it was very old and once belonged to his uncle. But if the water didn't get much less, at least it didn't get any more. "That's funny," said Mr. Brown, jumping up in from his armchair and rubbing his forehead. "I could have sworn I felt a spot of water." "Don't be silly, dear. How could you?" Mrs. Brown, busy with her knitting, didn't even bother to look up. Mr. Brown grunted and returned to his newspaper. He knew he had felt something, but there was no point in arguing. He looked suspiciously at the children, but both Jody and Jonathan were busy writing their letter. "How much does it cost to send a letter to Mima?" asked Jonathan. Jody was about to reply when another drop of water fell from the ceiling at this time. Oh, right, on the table. Oh gosh, she jumped to her feet, pulling Jonathan after her. There was an ominous wet patch right over their heads and right underneath the bathroom. So guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, smash the like button and subscribe. We left off on page 40, which is pretty good. We're still on chapter 2, but we're almost on chapter 3. Yeah, about these 2 pages, and then these 2 pages, and then these 2 pages, and then we're on chapter 3. Paddington goes underground. So guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, smash the like button and subscribe. And guys, we'll see you next time. And I hope you enjoyed this video. So yeah, A Bear Called Paddington, part 3. See you guys next time. Bye!